And we're recording. So
cool.
Let's introduce ourselves. So Scott, tell us a bit about you.
Good morning. My name's Scott Wustenberg. I'm a functional medicine practitioner and chiropractor. I practice functional neurology, and we help people with chronic health injuries. I'm a blue belt in Jiu Jitsu. I've been training for about 2.5 years. Absolutely love it. I give it out as a rehabilitation practice to my patients, trying to get them to move their bodies a whole lot more effectively. I would look at it probably as a way of life, and kind of like breathing. You need to move, you need to be thinking, you need to be controlling your mind, and Jiu-Jitsu helps you in all of those things. I have a special focus in neurological disorders because I have a high-functioning autistic daughter, which has led me along a very windy garden path to look at gut biome and bacterial infections and things like pandas, as well as the whole plethora of neurodegenerative situations, trying to get her back from being, at 4, non-verbal, non-toilet trained, staring into space. And at 15, she's in the mainstream classroom. She's got friends. She works, and she is a capable young lady. She practices jiu-jitsu along with the whole family. My wife practices jiu-jitsu, as do all 3 of my daughters. So it's a family thing at that moment in time.
And I can see your mats in the background over there at your clinic.
Well, I have a movement room here at work, and so we have a universal space where we have mats, where we can practice jiu-jitsu and run small seminars at that moment in time, but we also run educational seminars in it and utilize it for small functions. So it's quite a handy thing to have. Not too many people have their own personal 6x9 meter space in their workspace. Kind of fun.
No, it's awesome.
We also
I have to say, I saw Scott speak at a conference, and I was really impressed. And I was sitting all the way in the back, and we were talking about neuroinflammatory conditions, if I recall correct. And
yes.
He mentioned that he prescribed jiu-jitsu to a lot of his patients, and I thought, oh my God, there's another one of us at this conference. I had to approach him and kind of build a rapport from there. So it's been great. I visited Scott's clinic in Brisbane, and he has a jiu-jitsu room, and your practice manager told me that you go in there on your lunch hour and roll some of the guys and then get back to practice. So
yeah, that's one of the things that we try and do. It depends on who's around and which patients that you schedule kind of in and around lunchtime. It works really well. I also use it when I was competing last year. We'd go on weekends. I'd train specifically and personally with some of the high belts, trying to get my techniques working.
Awesome.
And so, as I say, don't have to worry, sensei, about going in and using the dojo, because I can actually do it myself. Runs the danger of learning stupid technique, but that's why I train with people who are significantly more advanced than me. So hopefully that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But it's good.
So this episode kind of came about because I had my own personal health problems that Scott helped me with. He'd shoot me advice, and I thought, well, why not share it with the rest of the community? Because I constantly run into people, especially new jiu-jitsu practitioners, who don't know how to pick a staph infection early, who don't know how to pick cellulitis early. You kind of let it build into more than what it needs to be, and then a lot of them over-treat. And I was a culprit of this. Every time I'd see something, I'd be like, antibiotics, and obviously that's not the road we want to go down. So
definitely not.
Why skin infections in jiu-jitsu? Like, why is it so common in jiu-jitsu versus, say, just football? Or
I think realistically, a lot of sports carry these sorts of risks. I think football probably has equally as high a risk. I think one of the differences is that we have a lot more personal, close contact, and we are sweating an awful lot. We also have very grippy gis, or if you're wearing a full rash vest doing no gi, the tissue can get gripped by someone, and the cloth over the top of it will yank on your hair follicles. Now, as you abrade and damage the actual hair follicle itself, you actually open up the pathways. So every one of the holes in you, your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your skin follicles, is an entryway for bacteria to get into your system. So the body has these defense mechanisms to basically keep those protected, and we put a lot of things like zinc into the tissue. And every time you sweat, every time you secrete something, the body has zinc secreted into it, as well as white cells, natural killer cells, macrophages, etc., to try and make sure nothing can get in. Now, if you keep yanking on a spot and inflaming it and opening it up, you get this bigger cavity that bacteria can actually get into. Now, unfortunately, other factors, some people don't really appreciate the degree of necessity of hygiene in Jiu Jitsu. So some people may not be scrubbing and disinfecting their mats as regularly as they might want to do. So, of course, bacteria will last a really long time outside the human body. It doesn't require a lot of moisture to keep alive. And sweat is a really good growing medium because it's full of salt, full of sugar, full of dead skin follicle and tissue, that the bacteria will last a really long period of time outside the body. So if the mats aren't being disinfected, they're a really great place for growing bacterial infection. And then the next person rolls across the top of it, it gets into their sweat, rubs into their skin gets abraded by someone taking a really good grip on them, and it goes in. Now, the next part to that is you've got to keep in mind that there are bacteria and viruses all over you all the time. So oftentimes you've got to think of it that it's not that something new came into you, but that the infection was there all the time, and that it's us stressing our nervous systems, us stressing our body, lowering our immunity, poor sleep, poor emotional cognitive states that actually drives the brain and the immune connection to be unable to keep a lid on the infections that are there. And this is actually where the infections really kick in. So the more run down you get, the more chance you actually have of getting an infection that'll take hold. Because, as I say, sitting here at this moment in time, you look at your arm, there's like 1 billion different bacteria sitting on there at this moment. They're not causing a problem because my barrier is intact, my immune system's managing it. But if I stress myself hard enough, I could start coming up with pustules, etc., in all sorts of places I don't want.
So the infections are, what you're saying is they're opportunistic. So when
very
you're
opportunistic things, absolutely. And it's really that abrasion, the ability to lower your immune defense against it that'll actually help it to set up camp. And this is where some of the problems with people's overtraining will come in. Look, I've got this competition that I've got to put hours and hours and hours, and I'm working and I'm not getting to sleep early enough. And we focus on the end goal rather than looking at the total holistic environment of your health and well-being. And so we might not be eating effectively enough. We're eating high carbohydrate foods for energy. We might be consuming things that we're actually allergic to. And so if we eat things that we're allergic to, that's going to shift the Th1, Th2 balance of our immune system and make us fight off the allergy response, but lower our ability to actually fight off bacterial or viral infections. So at that moment in time, you become a prime candidate for these things to get in.
So essentially, it's a very holistic problem. So it doesn't come from one source. It's not necessarily just from jiu-jitsu. It's not necessarily just from the environment you're in, but it's a combination of all those things.
That's exactly it. And yeah, I think people have been trained to believe that bacteria are very predatory, viruses are very predatory, they're going to get you. And that's not the case. You know, as you walk through any room space, there are thousands of droplets of viruses in the environment. As you kind of walk near people, brush them, you'll get bacteria interchanging between their skin biome and your skin biome. You don't get infected because your immune system and your barriers are intact. You have to actually drop your bundle, lower your immune defenses, lower your energy patterns, stress yourself to actually break these things open. Now, the exceptions to that are things like tick bites, mosquito bites, etc. Those things are actually directly penetrating you and allowing something that they're infected with to get into your system. And again, if there's enough imbalance in your tissue, you're too acidic or otherwise, your system might actually start creating a problem. But that's a different sort of infection than what we're talking about here.
So then how contagious is something like a staph infection? If your immune system is intact and you're doing things quite well, how contagious is it when you make contact with someone else with an infection?
Not particularly. Now, the exception to that is what we call golden staph, or Staph aureus. Staph aureus is quite a contagious infection. And again, you know, we need to take hygiene steps about it. But in some ways, you could say it looks a lot worse than it actually is. You know, being around someone, you know, touching someone is not going to get you a staph infection. Being directly exposed and transmitting, so touching your lesion and touching into people will spread the bacteria. It's there, you damage your barrier, you're much more likely to actually get the infection at that moment in time. But rolling with someone and just being in an environment where there is staph without damage to your epithelium and mucosal membranes won't directly cause an infection at that moment in time. Now, that said, I'm not going to recommend someone with an active lesion to be out there on the mat trying to test the strength of my statement.
Yeah.
You know,
well, if you have something like an active lesion and then you're constantly sweating over the lesion and you're restricting it from oxygen because you're wearing a gi over the top of it, probably not a good idea to.
No, and you are going to put it into other people's environments and it will live outside the body very effectively. So that's the hygiene component of it. You know, like perception of these things is that, you know, someone's got one, you touch them, you're going to get the infection straight away. And it's just not that bad. It's not anything like as contagious as that. Otherwise, we'd all be dying. But the problem with things like golden staph is that they are fairly antibiotic resistant now because we've kind of bred them into that state. And because of that, when you get one, they're actually reasonably difficult to get rid of. And that's where a lot of this repetitive infection comes from. It's not necessarily you've got a new infection. It's that they actually get into the system, you suppress them, but you don't necessarily knock them out. And then the next time you get stressed and run down enough, up they come, hi, I'm still here, and we get more indications of the lesions. Similar things that you might have seen with chickenpox. You get the herpes infection, it stays in the system after the chickenpox is kind of dealt with, and then, you know, 20 years later you're getting a cold sore, 40 years later you're getting a shingles outbreak in the system.
Yeah. So something like golden staph can kind of lay dormant in your body and not present itself.
Once you get it under control, the first time, like people will take the antibiotics, they'll knock it down, the skin heals up, we think that we're on top of it, but you may not have fully got rid of it because you haven't altered the holism of the environment enough to actually fully kill it off. We feed these things in our systems. They like to live in places like our gut.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes imbalance to the gut microbiome by eating high amounts of processed carbohydrates like French fries, for instance, or kebabs. To quote that wonderful picture I saw. Foods that have a high amount of really non-useful sugars. Sugars feed bacteria like nobody's business. The good bacteria are generally fed on fibrous vegetables, you know, cabbage, spinach, etc., and they help digest that for us and make nutrients out of it to feed us. So if you feed the biome the wrong things, you will get your gut quorum out of balance, and those bacteria are much more likely to be inflammatory to your system and actually modulate your immune system to lower your defenses so that you can't fight off infections as effectively.
Yep, got it. Okay. So another really interesting question is how to detect it early. So at what point, like I've had a staph infection before where I see it and it looks like a little pimple and people wouldn't even notice, but I know it's staph because it feels like staph. So, and then I've seen a lot of people out there on the mats that will have like open lesions, and it might have been a pimple or ingrown hair that they've ripped off.
And
And
that's exactly the sort of thing that we're looking for. That's the abrasions that I'm talking about, where people will have grabbed the gi, grabbed the top, and have pulled on the hair, which actually rips open the tissue.
yeah,
The difficulty is detecting it, exactly as you said, and you've got to look at things like your axillary or the lymph nodes in the groin or around the neck. We need to be looking for, is there any extra swelling or inflammation in other areas, because that signifies that the immune system's actively trying to get involved and is making white cells and trying to filter out garbage. So while it might look like a small red dot with maybe a small head at that moment in time, like a pimple, if we're starting to see other signs, like it's getting into the lymphatics under the armpits, in around the throat, temperature's raising up, we're getting a little bit of tiredness when we wouldn't expect it. Like we didn't do that big, harder rolling session, but the next morning I'm feeling a lot more tired and fatigued than I'd expect. These are indications that our immune system might be struggling and having to pull resources from one area to actually fight the infection and try and keep it under control. Because remember, these bacteria are generally there all the time. It's whether we give them ability to invade us and cause problems that's the issue. So it's always resource management balance. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that some of these strep and staph infections we've had since early childhood. So you may have remembered the thing called school sores or impetigo. A lot of the people who listen to this might have had school sores when they were a kid at primary school. They form this really unpleasant looking, crusty looking scab that doesn't heal very well, and it keeps growing. And these are the similar things that we'll be seeing ultimately in people who are on the mat if they don't turn into, so again, the and, and to some degree. But it's really hard to kill an infection that's 1 trillion deep. That it just doesn't happen. So you're really trying to get your immune system to suppress it. And that's why it stays there. And it's the stress on your body that brings it back out again. So it's trying to look for the hallmark signs of, how is my global system working? Am I repairing well in general? Am I recovering from my training? Am I seeing more of these folliculitis irritations? Is there something more going on? And then in which case you need to be looking, not just, oh, maybe I need antibiotics, but we need to be looking at that wholesale lifestyle factors. Am I actually consuming enough nutritious food to run my immune system? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I drinking enough water? Am I consuming too much coffee or cola or any of the other possibilities? Because it's those building blocks that are going to allow us to actually push back against the bugs.
Yeah. Beautiful. Best way to keep
red marking heading up a lymphatic line from any mark on you. So if you see a red halo that starts to have a track leading up from any skin lesion towards the nearest large joint or organ system, such as if it's on your forearm and it's going up the arm in a streak, you know that you've got a septic infection going on, which is either strep or staph, most likely.
So the one way I've seen, I've done this myself actually, is if I get a little bit of a red mark and I think it has a potential of spreading, I actually grab a permanent marker or a black marker and draw a circle around it.
Yep.
Keep an eye on it for a little while. So that's a very easy, practical tip that people can do. And if it spreads outside that circle within a day or 24 hours, because staph seems to spread real quick, then you know that you have an infection going on. So
I think that's a great idea.
The best way to keep our gis clean now, I've said, like after almost a decade of training jiu-jitsu, I've tried almost everything. And what I like to do is, once I get home from training, I take all of my gear, put it in the laundry sink with a bunch of white vinegar, maybe some eucalyptus, before I throw it in the washing machine.
Yep.
Throw it in the washing machine. The next day I air dry it. I don't really use a dryer very often.
No.
So the use of things like antimicrobials, I think, can be problematic. And I think a lot of people are washing their gis and washing their gear with a lot of antimicrobial products. So if we can touch on that, what your opinion is.
I'm exactly the same. We use white vinegar. We also use bicarbonate soda and Epsom salts. So acid or alkali is where we're kind of going for at this moment in time. Bacteria can operate within a very specific pH range within their life cycle. So if you can stress it with either too much acid or too much alkali, you can basically kill it. So vinegar, obviously, acetic acid has a pH somewhere around 3.2, 3.3, which is way outside the natural operating range of a bacterium. So pouring that in there, soaking them in that will absolutely kill them. You can go the other end of the scale, especially if it's a white ghee as well, whereby if you're utilizing bicarbonate soda, it's a strong alkali at that moment in time. And again, a natural product. And it helps lighten things as well. So gets blood out of stuff really effectively.
Probably not your own blood.
Yeah, well, you don't really want other people's on you, but you don't really want to be bleeding if you can possibly help it anyway. But it happens. Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate is again a very alkaline product, and we can soak our clothing in that as well as ourselves to actually alter the pH in the cloth and alter the pH. So if you have a bath, one of the ways to actually help your skin infections is to actually soak yourself hot water, bicarbonate soda, and I'd put about half a cup in there and about 2 cups of Epsom salts. And people will look for brands like Radox is one of them, and they go, oh, it's great for muscle relaxing. Well, yes, it is. But what we're really looking for is if we raise up the alkalinity, it's going to kill off a lot of the inappropriate skin bacteria. So, I don't
alkaline and acid.
Yeah, absolutely, because they have to stay within a certain range. If you create something that's really hard on their life cycle, they will rupture and die at some point in time. I don't use a lot of the things like Dettol or the antimicrobial, antibacterials. I think there's a variety of reasons. One, I don't think they work particularly well. B, they generally come with some funny smells and fragrances, which I don't really want stuck in my gis. They also have some really interesting long-term risk factors towards cancer and breaking down mucosal barriers and epithelial barriers in us. Anything, we have a biome on our skin equally as much as we have in our gut that actually helps protect us. So when you're actually rubbing artificial antimicrobials onto your tissue from what was in your gi, you're actually going to be killing off your naturally protective microbiome, which actually leaves you more prone to colonization by something you don't want. So that doesn't really occur in the same way with something like vinegar or bicarb soda. Again, I line dry and sun dry my gis, or I should politely be more honest and say my lovely wife looks after that. Big props to the way she looks after us. But there's a couple of reasons. One, I ruined a perfectly good gi by it having to go through the dry because we were running out of time, and it shrunk as much as they all say they're somewhat pre-shrunk, they're not. But two, the actual ultraviolet light is again particularly harmful for things like molds and bacteria, and ultraviolet light from the sun will actually kill them. The other thing that you can do is you get one of those vacuum sealant bags, the ones you buy to store clothing for long periods of time. You fold your gi up after it's or being used or otherwise, and you put it in there, seal it up, and stick it in the deep freeze for 2 hours. So again, bacteria and mold have a very specific life cycle range that they operate in. You get them too acid, too alkaline, they die. You get it too hot or too cold, they die. That's why we preferably hot wash our clothes, because again, you take it up towards boiling temperature, most bacteria are going to die. You take it from frozen, so you're down 7 degrees below zero, then you stick it into the washing machine. So you've gone from -7 to like 66 degrees. You've got an 83 degree temperature differential that thing's about to head through, most bacteria and mold are going to die at that moment in time. We then stick it outside under ultraviolet light, and that irradiation will also then continue the process of killing them. So I try and hit it from every possible perspective, and we just don't put the artificial antimicrobials in there. Most of them, again, are being found to be toxic for human health, and we're withdrawing them from the market these days anyway.
Yeah, I have heard that before, and I have seen that touched upon in conferences. So, yeah, very interesting. The other question we had was the use of over-the-counter products. Now, you recommended something that's been a lifesaver, pseudo cream, real simple. Yep. So it's what it looks like.
Absolutely wonderful
Zinc
product.
oxide. $5 from Kohl's, last you pretty long. And then I also have, just for argument's sake, some cephalexin here as well that I have seen in my cupboard. So let's touch on when, how, and what we're doing with these guys.
Okay, so Sudocrem is a really simple product that I found from having kids, or when we had small kids. It's touted as an anti-nappy rash cream because it's a barrier cream. The zinc is very reparative and healing for skin lesions and irritations, burns, boils, etc. And usually, like, you get the nappy rash from things like acid in the pee, spending too long against the kid's skin because you didn't know they peed and you left them in the nappy slightly too long. So the uric acid burns their bum, and Sudocrem is an excellent repair and barrier. So the benefit of putting it on your skin, especially if you think you've got a mild infection at that moment in time, it acts as a barrier, both to stop bugs getting out and rolling onto other people, but also to stop stuff getting into you, as well as it holds the zinc up against the hair follicle, and zinc acts as an antimicrobial at that particular point in time and alters the oxidative stress on the bacteria and actually punctures it, and it causes off. So it's nice and non-toxic. Like castor oil's non-absorbable, so it can't get in and can't get out. It's inert at that moment in time. Zinc oxide is, again, a nice, safe, inert product. It's not going to harm you in any way, shape, or form. So we don't have any real troubles at that moment in time. Now, the antibiotics, again, are a really great idea at that moment, because if it starts to get away, and doing something as simple as soaking yourself, putting something like the Sudocrem on isn't doing it, then we need to actually give your immune system a boost and knock the opportunistic bacteria down. Now, at the same point in time, we go back to my earlier points that you'd still use the barrier cream, and you'd still look at your lifestyle and whether you're spending too much time on airplanes or eating poor quality food or not getting enough sleep, or am I drinking too much coffee and not enough water? Because you've got to look at, why is my body not doing what it's designed to do? It's designed to push back and stop things getting in. That's why kind of 70 to 80% of our immune system is barrier mediated. You stop it getting in the first instance. So 70-odd% of your immune system is in your skin and your gut lining. So we want to make sure that those mechanisms are operating at their most optimal level, and that we're not rupturing. This is some of the stuff that people may have heard of, such as leaky gut syndrome. That will make you more predisposed to these sorts of infections, because you swallow a lot of your bad bacteria with your food, and then it goes through the gut wall, gets into your bloodstream, and this is where those systemic infections come from. You then stress your skin, and it comes out and finds a really happy breeding ground for infection. So antibiotics can be an absolute lifesaver, but we want to use those as a kind of point of last resort rather than as the immediate go-to, because the problem with them is that bacteria are really canny and they mutate really quickly. And the more we put antibiotics in and we knock off most of them, if you leave one bacteria alive at that moment in time, it's likely to have developed a gene code that didn't die after that bacteria. It sets up colonies that have antibiotic resistant genes. This is where we're getting things like golden staph from. So antibiotics are beautiful things. It would probably all be a much worse society without them. But they've now been kind of overused and over-relied on for about 40, 50 years, to the point where we're giving them for the wrong thing. Someone gets a virus, they get given antibiotics. Okay, well, that doesn't work because the antibiotics don't work on a virus anyway. But what then occurs is that we knock off some of the bacteria in the body, and the ones that didn't get knocked off by it have genes that are being selected for that don't get killed off by those antibiotics in the future. So you are unlikely, if you overuse them, to be able to use them perpetually because they won't work.
Yeah. So leave antibiotics as a last resort, and we try
always last resort. They're the thing to do when nothing else has worked. If you kind of look at this situation, you kind of go, right, well, I'm not doing as well. I'm starting to show up some infection. I may be overtraining. I may be overstressed. So what can I do about that? Well, it's simple. You go to the dojo and you watch your friends train and you give them pointers and you help and support. You don't stress yourself at that time. You go, oh, well, instead of going out with the boys this weekend and having a bender and then kind of getting in at 2 a.m. and then going, etc., you go, hey, maybe I don't do that. Maybe I just have a night in, we have a nice meal, we get to bed early, we wake up feeling refreshed, so I can start repairing myself. It's the self-care, self-hygiene that I think will really make the difference. That's going to improve your longevity on the mat, full stop. Because while we're kind of talking about skin infections and infections in general, longevity in jiu-jitsu is really about being able to heal effectively to overcome the abuse that we're putting ourselves under. I mean, let's face it, we should all probably remember that first week in jiu-jitsu where you kind of saw the meme and it said, welcome to jiu-jitsu. Say goodbye to the last day you wake up pain-free. You know, it's hard on our tissue. You have to repair effectively. And so if you're pushing all your sinews and you're not getting enough repair time, it makes you rife for opportunistic infection.
Yeah. And what I've noticed as well with training with professional athletes and people of really high caliber around the world, what separates the professionals from the amateurs is the ability to do exactly that. They hit their repair and recovery just as hard as they hit their training sessions.
Yeah.
And a lot of them do a lot of like low heart rate aerobic work, a lot of long drilling, a lot of nothing too intense. One guy, I don't want to mention names, but one guy didn't even roll live rounds, and he fights in the UFC. So
wow,
4 weeks coming up to the fight, he didn't do any live rounds. He did all situational drills. And just saved the hard days for the sparring. So that's
awesome.
So that's definitely a good approach. I had a really interesting question. I've had personal experience with this. Training with psoriasis and eczema, does that make you more prone to skin infections? And obviously psoriasis and eczema have other underlying causes, like we're looking at food allergies and potentially hereditary conditions and zinc imbalances and all sorts of stuff. But if you do have psoriasis and eczema and you are training jiu-jitsu, what should you be worried about? What should you not be worried about?
Again, in those instances, the first thing to say is you are safe. You may be slightly more prone to an infection just because the skin is slightly more broken and therefore slightly more open. But that's where the joy of things like pseudocreme comes in. You put your barrier on, it's going to actually close you up from that perspective. And it's actually really nice and soothing and healing for that sort of skin condition. In general terms, you're not significantly more at risk at that moment in time as against anyone else. I think realistically, it's those other factors that you're touching on that will actually be driving some of the greater risk factors for co-infections at that moment in time. If you're eating food that you're allergic to that's driving eczema, psoriasis, this is likely to be damaging the gut. It's likely to be inflaming your immune system. As you shift your Th1, Th2 balance, you get more inflammation, you get less effective bacterial or viral copability. So it's not really the skin plaquing that's going to make you more susceptible. That's just a symptom of the underlying disturbance of your entire system. Again, there's no real risk apart from people being judgy about looking and go, oh, what's wrong with you? And people aren't necessarily the nicest about stuff that they don't really understand. But in of itself, eczema and psoriasis is safe on the mats. It's not contagious. It doesn't have any other worries from that point of view. You just need to make sure that you're doing things that are going to keep it de-inflamed as much as it possibly can. Things, as I say, like the zinc creams, etc., are going to be helpful. But lots of people will use cortisone creams to try and shrink the plaque sizes, etc. Now, the problem with that is while it will reduce inflammation, it does make your skin thinner.
Mm-hmm.
That makes you more prone to tearing, prone to tissue injury, and a whole lot of problems from that point of view, which is actually going to make you more susceptible to skin infection at that moment in time, because it blunts the immune response. So you've thinned the skin barrier, you've blunted your immune microbial, antibacterial response, and you're putting yourself into a situation where you're more prone to getting transference infections from other people. So probably not the best thing to be using or rolling at a moment like that, because you are going to be more susceptible to trouble.
Yeah. So with things like psoriasis and eczema, look for the underlying causes of inflammation, because that's essentially what it is. Yeah. And the last really interesting question that I got was recurring cellulitis from impact. So this is from a guy that is a Muay Thai practitioner, and obviously a lot of shin clashes, checking kicks and kicking pads, and that type of stuff. So trauma, like blunt force trauma, and how does that impact the tissue, and then can that get infected? I mean, in this case, he didn't have a lesion, so it was just constantly coming up with no lesions.
So there's a couple of different forms of cellulitis at that moment in time. One is an infectious cellulitis, which actually has a bacterial agent in the tissue that's actually driving inflammation and infection. There is
something like staph and strep and...
Yeah, absolutely. There's also a non-infectious cellulitis where you're actually getting tissue inflammation, and the systemic inflammation is actually getting out of control. And this is, again, if we think about it, an imbalance to the global system. Your ability to repair is lower than your ability to take damage. And so in that person's case, we'd be looking at, because it's common in stuff like pre-diabetes situations, so imbalances to blood sugar. Some people will have a genetic predisposition to a heightened inflammatory state, so their body just makes more inflammation down the road, maybe by 70% or so. That time between taking the impact, so you train today, if you've got 70% more inflammatory response in your body than the next person, you might need to meet like 3 days before you go back and retrain that same style. You might be able to go work out, but the actual hard impact on it, you need more time to heal it between. We need to be looking at things like vitamin D levels, thyroid, parathyroid levels, calcium levels in their diet, vitamin K levels, because all those things harden the bone. So if you're actually having impact creating swelling in the bone tissue and lesions over the top of it, you may not actually be running some of the other co-systems effectively. You may not actually be able to harden the bone effectively to actually cause it to heal at that moment in time.
Yeah.
So I'd be looking for other things as against any form of infection at that moment in time. It's an inflammatory situation, and it means that there's probably an imbalance to his ability to heal, or her ability to heal the damage, given the time period between amounts of damage. Muay Thai and shin checks is always going to create some degree of damage and bruising. It's just if you keep hitting on the same spot and you can't get rid of it, it's going to expand. And then at some point it becomes an issue that you can't actually control very effectively. And that's what turns into cellulitis.
Yeah, got it. Before we run out of our 45-minute limit for our recording, and Scott obviously has to see patients this morning, so he's taken time out of his day to do this, which is amazing. And thank you very much. And I hope that people can take something away from this. And, it is something serious. Staph is a serious problem, especially in our community for jiu-jitsu. So I hope that we've helped a lot of people.
Absolutely. I'm sort of hoping that people will kind of view it as not the predator, because there's this emotional bent that these things are quite predatory, and if they're there, they're going to get you. That is not the case. They are absolutely opportunistic. They will cause you problems if you allow them to get in. But there's a lot of stuff, especially with personal hygiene, rest, recovery, that will make it much harder for things, situations to take hold and actually get out of control. Look, check yourself, check your diet, check your cleaning, make sure that you're looking after your gis. Don't leave your gis till like the next day or bundle them up and stick them in your locker at the dojo. You know, that's just wrong. People are one of the ones we haven't touched on. Belts, wash your belts. It's not magic. It won't lose any magic if you stick it in the washing machine and get rid of any of the sweat and garbage that people put on it.
Yeah. So in the wise words, check yourself before you wreck yourself, basically. Make sure you
exactly.
check all the time. Yeah. Scott, where can people find you if they want to find you? Guys, if you're in Brisbane,
Yeah.
you know.
So I'm in Brisbane. My website is optimallife.com.au. I have a Facebook page, optimallifenutrition.com or whatever it is. You know, we do Skype consults for people who are in other areas of the country and other parts of the world if needs be. I do that for the nutrition medicine sides of things. Obviously, we will determine depending on what's happening with people, whether we actually need to physically get them up or whether I send them to other practitioners that I know and trust in other parts of the country. So if anyone needs some help, I'm more than happy to look at them.
Awesome. Guys, I'll share all those links when I post this video up. I'll share the links to the pseudo cream and some of the products that we've talked about. And we do not get any royalties from pseudo cream.
No, I have no conflicts of interest in any of these things. These are just things that I've found that work really effectively. Obviously, I'll get paid if people come and pay me, but otherwise, this is just let's hope people find it useful and help themselves and stay well so that you have a longer career rolling on the mats.
Definitely. Awesome. Thank you, Scott.
You're most welcome.
We'll do this again. Have a great day.
I look forward to it.
See you, man.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.